Challenges are ready for us. Well, there they go. You can actually do it all through Zoom, but that's the way it's set up. So, okay, it looks like we are live.
Okay, so I'll call the meeting to order. It is 2:03 by my watch. We do have a quorum. We have 3 out of the 4 members of the voting members of the Finance Committee present. So Matt, welcome again. We really appreciate your willingness to meet with us and help us understand the current solar environment and hopefully inform our purchase versus lease decision on our solar array. We could potentially start with the questions that we asked, but I would defer to you whether that's a good starting point or you think someplace else would be better to start.
Yeah, I'm happy to start with the questions you've asked and I'm happy to answer, I guess, anything I can be helpful on here. I guess just to maybe give you brief background, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Competitive Energy Services. We're an energy consulting and advisory firm in Portland. I've been with the company for 11 years now, and I think for really most or all of those 11 years, I've been heavily involved in a lot of our solar work, which especially in the last few years has involved a lot of net energy billing in Maine. We've also done over those years a lot of looking at on-site solar arrays, PPAs, very similar to the one you've got in front of you or the one that the town is contracted with. And so I'm speaking from that experience. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not legal counsel. I don't pretend to advise or provide legal advice. I'm also not an accountant. We tend to approach things with an economic lens, but in terms of some of the modeling, it all looked actually very similar to some of the modeling work that we do, often for larger scale systems. But I think I can use that experience to hopefully give you my best guidance I can.
Great. Well, the first question we had was the proposal we received on the purchase really focused on cash flow. And is that an approach you would use, or would you add in some looks at opportunity costs or some other decision-making tool?
Yeah, cash flow, I would say, is really common for this type of buyout analysis. Common metrics are, it seems, similar to what you're looking at. The simple payback, return on investment, net present value numbers are all often referenced as helpful decision-making points when evaluating a potential solar project purchase, whether it's upfront or whether it's a buyout after the tax recapture period is concluded in a PPA, like you've got here. So we don't often use an opportunity cost. I mean, in this case, you've got an existing asset that's still got plenty of useful life. I think like most things, and we can get into some of the nuances maybe of this analysis, but like most things, when you own them, the economics are generally better than when you rent them or when you pay for a service. And the question is often, can you afford to own them, and does it make sense to own them? And I know that's the question you all are grappling with.
Okay. So we're currently part of the net energy buyback credit system, and there's a lot of discussion in the legislature about changes to that. How does that potentially impact us?
Yeah, it's a good thing to be aware of. That is, I know, a hot topic in Augusta right now that we've been following pretty closely. For this array, I mean, you're in the net energy billing program in the volumetric, the kilowatt hour program, and in the form of that program that really even existed before the big change to net energy billing that happened in 2019 that resulted in all of the projects and all of the costs that have the legislature and the PUC concerned right now. So there are, at the most extreme end of some of the proposals out there, bills that would just completely do away with net energy billing as a concept. From what we've heard and from what I'm seeing, I don't expect that's what's going to ultimately come out of this. I think, especially for an array of this size on the smaller end of the spectrum, that's on town property, that's tied to on-site, tied to usage that's really in the same geographic vicinity. This is a strong case for net energy billing. I think those are all pre-qualifiers that folks have looked at in the net energy billing program as things that they could change or things that might be altered as in the program, is maybe system sizes over a certain threshold shouldn't qualify, or maybe system sizes that are completely remote shouldn't qualify. But the fact that this is located locally and it's small and it's using volumetric and in fact it qualified for net energy billing before the program expanded, I think are all reasons why you should have a reasonable degree of confidence that the program that you're using now will exist in the future here.
Okay, so then related to that, Ellie is doing some work in the climate action team in the town, looking at heat pump technology for our firehouse, our town office, the school, potentially our public works building. So that would change our energy consumption significantly. Would that, are there changes in the amount of usage for the town that would impact our current program? Because I think we're under something called SGS, and when I looked that up quickly, it said typically usage of 50,000 kilowatts a year, I think, and we're already over that a little bit. So if we go further, do we put ourselves at risk, perhaps?
I think, and I briefly reviewed some of the documents provided, so feel free to correct or question me if there's something I may have missed here, but I think there are a number of meters that the town has, a number of services that share in the kilowatt hours generated by this project. And so each one of those services are going to be classified at a different rate code. And so it's really the individual service that's going to dictate the rate that CMP applies. So the SGS, the small general service category that you're looking at, is you have that exactly right, is what's going to apply to loads below that threshold. And that's, I think, even with some heat pumps, some electrification, because you're spreading this across multiple services, you should still probably be in that rate code for most of your load. And I think the concern, as you think about purchasing, the concern in my mind would be more if there's anything you're anticipating the town might do to limit your electric load in the future, because right now, from what I saw, this system's generating close to 100% of your needs, or at least 100% of the needs of the accounts that are subscribed to it. And so, purchasing this and then making some big change and dropping your electric load, might harm you, but you really be in that situation whether you continue with the PPA or you purchase this anyway. But given what you've just described about looking at electrification and given current trends, heat pump adoption, et cetera, I think it's more than likely your electric loads will grow, in which case having either the PPA or the purchase is going to be beneficial to you.
Great. The cash flow analysis showed energy credit sales for 5 years. We don't know a lot about energy credit sales, other than we understand they could be sold or not sold. Why would they be limited to 5 years in a projection like this?
This was one piece that was puzzling to me as well. I saw in this analysis assumption there was a REC term of 5 years. And perhaps it's a conservative approach to assuming that you get some value for those renewable energy credits for 5 years, but no longer. But I'm not aware of a reason you couldn't continue to sell those in future years. The question might be what they're worth. And to get at that question, so these renewable energy credits are valuable in Maine under Maine's renewable portfolio standard, which is a state law that requires electricity providers in the state to source a certain percentage of their electricity from renewable resources. And the way that they demonstrate compliance with that law is they buy the required percentage in renewable energy credits. And it establishes this market for these renewable energy credits, or RECs. And those RECs have to qualify by coming from certain technologies, of which solar qualifies as a class 1, the highest category of REC. And right now, the state has a very aggressive goal to source 80% of the state's electricity from renewables by the end of the decade. And especially given the current political environment, it's going to be challenging for the state to get to that goal. Offshore wind was really in mind as maybe a big piece of that goal, and that definitely doesn't look as promising now as maybe it did a year ago. So, in my mind, these RECs, and in our minds, when we're talking with our clients, these RECs are likely to have value into the mid-2030s, assuming, the state still needs a lot more renewables to meet our goals. At some point over this time period, maybe in the 2040s, it's possible that the grid has met its renewable needs and these RECs won't have the same value financially. The REC also carries the claim to the environmental attributes, which is really the sustainability or carbon benefits associated with the solar production. So when you sell them, you relinquish that claim. So right now, Revision owns that claim, and they may have sold it to help finance the project, and whoever bought it owns that claim. If you buy the project, now those RECs are yours, and if you choose to retire them, the town can claim that this portion of your electricity is renewable and carbon-free, but you can sell them for additional financial revenue as shown here. And I would estimate that you could probably expect to continue to sell them into the mid-2030s, if not longer, depending on how quickly the state can meet its renewable goals. I know that's a lot of concepts there, so feel free to ask questions or, yeah.
Okay. Other components of the cash flow analysis, the insurance costs seemed extremely low to us. Did they look reasonable to you?
This is a question I can't say I'd be the best person to answer. Often we're dealing with a variety of clients and often looking at insuring systems of a much larger scale. And so it seems roughly in line scaling those costs to a system of this size, but I can't say definitively on the insurance cost question. I think it may be best to ask an insurance provider if that number has you concerned.
Sure, fair enough. Under maintenance, the only maintenance, there's two components of maintenance. One is maintenance and management agreement that's got a small fee attached, which basically means that Revision would respond to an issue, kind of like a oil burner service contract. But then the only costs, actual maintenance costs associated beyond that would be replacing inverters in 2033. What's
Yeah.
your experience, or how do you forecast actual maintenance costs on a system like this?
Typically, you would have a ongoing O&M contract with a provider who, right, would be on call in the case of an issue, would be responsible for replacing parts that need replacement, and any other general maintenance that comes up, of which I think you've characterized it appropriately. It would be fairly limited. That industry standard in estimating those O&M costs is typically a penny or two per watt. So in this case, the $1,200 for a roughly 60,000 watt capacity system is, roughly 2 pennies. And so it's, at the higher end of that range, but that's not surprising for a smaller scale system. Some of these maintenance costs are fixed, and as you get larger, you approach the penny per watt range. But yeah, that number doesn't surprise me as an annual fee tied to an O&M contract. Of course, you don't absolutely need an O&M contract. You could try to take that in-house or contract on an as-needed basis, but I think it's wise for the town to probably have an O&M provider on hand.
Okay, but this O&M contract, all it is basically is a contract that says we will respond with a certain time frame and do any required maintenance at our standard rates, and they give us the rates, etc. So
I haven't seen the terms of the contract itself. There is some variation there. I mean, depending on that, so the 1,200 in your interpretation then is just the cost to retain the service, but then you're paying the hourly rate for any service that's required.
Right.
Gotcha. Yeah, that may be a point worth pushing on, and I think, yeah, I do think that is in line with roughly where we see O&M contracts for solar systems. I guess what's included in that contract might be, that's a piece I really I hadn't looked through or seen that proposed agreement yet.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yep.
Solar degradation in the system, some percentage per year or some percentage over 10 years. I think I heard somewhere that 1% per year is reasonable. Would you normally build in, what kind of degradation would you normally build into this type of analysis?
We almost always use 0.5% a year, which is the same that it appears to be using here, that the model appears to be using here. That's a pretty universal industry standard. The 1% a year you've seen may have been more common with systems 20, 30 years ago, but really based on a lot of the panels installed in the last decade, 0.5% seems to have proven out as a reasonable assumption.
Okay. If we did decide to purchase it, would it be reasonable to do a physical inspection prior to the purchase? Would that really reveal much of anything, or?
Yeah, we have seen that. I think on a system of this size and scale, especially given, many of the inverters are not, the status of the inverters, generally, the status of the system, it may not be necessary here. If you chose to contract for O&M services with a company other than Revision, who's the current owner and installer, they may want to do their own inspection before they commit to an O&M price. But if you elect to continue with Revision as an O&M provider, I wouldn't worry about having an independent inspector, because Revision is going to be the one under O&M contract anyway.
Okay,
And John,
and then,
do you mind if
go
I
ahead.
just, I was wondering that question about the inspection is that I know, and I don't know, Matt, if we ever sent this info to you. Was that partly a concern with the amount of inverter replacements that they've had to do since because I don't, you guys probably know these details better than I do at this point, but I know there was some concern about they've had to do a number of inverter replacements. And I don't know really anything about it beyond that. Was that part of your reasoning for that question, or was that more of just a general question?
I think it was more just a general question, although I think before we move forward with a purchase, we need to document exactly what happened with the inverters, how many were replaced, when they were replaced, why they were replaced, and the existing OEM warranty on those inverters.
We already have all of that information, but Revision they haven't shared, I don't think they know exactly why they all failed. They said it was a isolated hardware issue that they found across different arrays they installed with that specific inverter, and they haven't had to replace things since 2022. So we have all the dates they were replaced and which ones were replaced. Not a very comprehensive explanation, but they say it was an isolated thing.
Thanks, Ellie. So then, Matt, I think the last question that we sent to you was, there's some difference that shows up between what CMP pays for generation and what Revision has for generation under the PPA. And maybe that's a Revision question, but is that a normal thing that there would be differences?
Yeah, this question I didn't quite follow. So when you say the generation that Revision sees under the PPA, what are you referring to there?
Well, Ellie could maybe answer it better than I could, but my understanding is that, and it could simply be timing, but the kilowatts that we're paying for under the PPA don't exactly line up with the kilowatts that CMP is paying for.
So we can't see that on this cash flow analysis, but on some of the other pages of this analysis Revision provided, they had, month by month and year by year breakdowns of exactly how many kilowatt hours were produced. And there was a column that would say PPA generation, so that's Revision's data, and then a different column with CMP generation. And those numbers, they were always close, but not equal. And I didn't have an answer for why that would be.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I think I was just pulling up that Excel analysis. I think I see that here. It may be the case, and we see this from time to time, or Revision is billing their PPA off of their own metering, whereas CMP is recording the kilowatt hour credits you're receiving off of their metering. And
Right.
If those meters aren't the same, then the numbers won't be the same. If there's a significant discrepancy, it means one of the meters is wrong. And that's worth looking into. If the discrepancy is, within a few percentage points, I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's probably just, losses or differences between the metering points.
Okay. I think that's all the questions that we gave you in advance. Does anyone else have questions they would like to ask of Matt?
I had added one to the list about the utility rate assumptions made in this analysis. I think there's probably a lot of uncertainty about what is going to happen in that domain over the coming years politically, but was just wondering what you made of the 2.5% escalator there.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question, and that's something we do pay a lot of attention to, as Julia knows, having done some of that work with us in the past. 2.5% is actually roughly over a 20-year time horizon. When we do a lot of modeling in New England, that's around where we come down. It's especially compared to some other solar analysis we see that there's often more aggressive escalator assumptions. 4 or 5% annually is not uncommon, and I think 2.5% is probably conservative given that context. So I think that is fair. Of course, as you can see in the few years of history listed here, and as we as ratepayers in the state of Maine know, the last few years have been bumpy for electricity rates. And so the 2.5% over a long time horizon is fair, but year to year variation can be extreme. But I think the 2.5% is fair.
Okay. Any
Matt?
other questions for Matt?
Yeah, if I might, John. Matt, if you were looking to make this decision, what are the metrics that you would focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the payback period here of less than 5 years is a good one to look at. I think the availability of capital, which is hard for me to comment on, not knowing the town's positions, but obviously the PPA has been, it seems, good for the town so far, and there's no reason to rush a buyout if you're not ready for it. The reason to do it is that over the longer term, once you get past that 5 or 6 year payback, now you're pocketing that much more every year. And so it is smart economically if you can afford it. It's just a question of when is the timing right to afford it. And and I think the fair market value calculation, that all seemed to match what it should. I think it's really just maybe a purchase timing question, but in terms of whether or not it's a good idea, I think given how this array has performed, the size, the alignment with the town's consumption, I don't see any concerns that it's going to be a bad investment. It's just a question of, is the timing right to make the investment?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone
Hi.
else have questions? Yep.
Yeah, I just had one question. I think we sent you this memo when the climate action team, this was about a year ago, we sort of reviewed this and kind of provided a recommendation to the select board. And our recommendation at that time was just to kind of sort of leave things as is. And I think the main reason we decided to do that was thinking about just sort of, and I think we were pretty conservative on that side, and we were less focused on, I think that's why this has come to the finance committee, is we were less focused on sort of the financials and more focused on kind of the the administration of the PPA versus sort of the administration of the system if the town owned it. And we're kind of, I think the decision we came to was sort of like, things are working well now, so like just keep doing that for now. But I think that if you have any sort of context about, things are pretty simple with the PPA. And I think our assumption was that it would be more complex if the town owned it. But I don't really know if that's an accurate assumption or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's a fair conclusion that that clearly the PPA has been working well, and the town's fully within its rights to continue with the PPA as is, and it's I think the buyout option presents an opportunity for a better economic outlook. And in terms of keeping things simple, it really maybe comes down to that O&M contract and how well, how much of the maintenance and operations you feel like is going to be adequately covered by provision or whoever you procure O&M services from, but of which Revision's a good provider. With no reason to say that they wouldn't be. I think this is just a question of what's covered in that agreement and whether the town has any concerns that you might be able to address through that agreement. But if the operations and maintenance is covered, then it should be maybe not all that different to the town other than the fact that, you'll have to make a large upfront purchase, and then after a little while, you'll get to see that much more of the benefits. You do have to manage the RECs, I guess, which is one added component here that I think in the materials I saw, Revision offers that service. I don't know if that's part of the O&M agreement they've proposed, but they will manage them on your behalf, I think, for a 3% fee. I think that's here in the model, the 3% REC expense, which appears to be 3% of whatever the RECs sell for, they keep, and then the remainder goes to the town. You would have also, maybe relevant to the sustainability committee, would be whether those RECs would be valuable to the town to consider in future years as part of the town's climate goals. But that, that would be one other piece that would need to be managed either through Revision or through someone at the town or some other service.
Anybody else have anything for Matt? It's very helpful for me, Matt. I'm sure it'll be helpful for the overall finance committee. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to help, and best of luck with your decision.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank
Have a
you.
good afternoon. Bye.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is public input for items not on the agenda. So that would include Julia or Ellie or Herb. Any of you have anything not on the agenda to talk about?
Thanks for letting us join.
Thank you for joining.
Yes, especially on a very warm, sunny Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
That takes
Where we
extra
should all be
effort.
elsewhere.
I somehow lost my screen here. I can still hear you, so that's a good thing.
Maybe. Well, we can see you.
Okay.
I mean, you're
I
coming
just have-
through.
I just have a blank screen. So we have no public input. The next item was fiscal capacity discussion. And maybe, so I boiled it down to a one-page document, and fiscal capacity was bonding capacity over and above planned reserves or reserve additions. I had it boiled down to a one-page that gave us or anyone the ability to do what ifs. So maybe you could bring that up, Chip.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
gonna go.
so I asked, I guess Jim didn't join us today. I guess he told us he wouldn't be here. I know Chip took a look at it. He came back with quite a bit of feedback, which he always does, and which is great. Did you have a chance to look at it, Jay?
I did. And I thought it was terrific. I thought it explained a lot. I guess maybe too many options in it in terms of the inflation rate and so forth. Maybe just do that pick a number and run with it.
Yeah, and that was Chip's feedback, and I just started this afternoon to not have two options on this sheet, and the what if would be the only what ifs would be, what's the inflation rate that you're gonna build into, let's say, taxes versus the inflation rate you're gonna build into non-capital school and municipal spending.
Right?
And then I wanted to, at the bottom of the sheet, figure out how to automate the calculation of, you have to go through this manually and say, okay, if in year 2029 you do a bond for $7 million, then you have to play with the math to get it to work out for the next 10 years. I think it would be great if we could figure out how to end up with that total bonding capacity and the years you can do it in an automated fashion. So
I think we could. I think we can put that in so that you put in, we just, I mean, just quick guess would be to park above the end reserves available, and you can, when you input something into this doesn't actually look like the last one. I'm looking for the last one, but anyway, I think we could do that. So you can put in, when you put it in, I'm not sure, but I think we could.
okay, all right. So we'll play with it some more. Basically, the story right now, if we had 3% inflation in our budget and in our capital spending ability for the next 10 years, starting with the 2026 budget, I think we could bond $8 to $10 million. But some of that $8 to $10 million comes in the last 7th, 8th, and 9th year. So, and that's important in figuring out what big projects you can do and what time frame you can do them. So, and then I think you can put in another 3 million or 4 million in bonding if you put an extra 30 to 40,000 into the capital budget in year one, and then add to that, inflate that every year through 10 years. So basically that says 30,000 is about a 1% tax increase. So if you go inflation plus the 1% every year, you end up with additional bonding dollars.
Right.
But we need to figure out how to make this spreadsheet simple to use, relatively reliable, and easy to understand what the input assumptions are. And related to that, my biggest concern right now with the budget is they showed a $97,000 shortfall, and expenses exceeded revenue by $97,000. And that's about a 3% tax increase. But in that budget, there's still a $250,000 use of undesignated reserve funds. And I don't think anybody knows whether those funds will be available or not. If they're not available, then I think that if the budget stayed where it is, that would be about a 10% real estate tax increase. Now, a big change in this year's budget is there's currently about 800,000 going into the reserve accounts. The last 2 or 3 years, it's been more like 500 or 550. So you can mitigate that large tax increase by not putting as much money in the reserve accounts.
Right. I'm curious. The big problem in the reserve accounts is the stone wharf, and the reason that got pumped up so much was because they felt that they had to show good faith and community effort and so forth. So, but Carol was going to talk to the DOT to sort of try and get a flavor as to how invested the town needed to be. And I don't know if she ever got an answer.
She didn't, if she got an answer, we haven't heard it.
Okay.
But switching gears a little bit and kind of transitioning from this discussion to the next discussion, which is the talk about a draft of the 426 community presentation. So in the select board meeting on Wednesday, that communication date was changed to May 14th. By May 14th, I think the budget needs to be finalized, and basically the warrants need to be ready to go. So we will be on the agenda for the next select board meeting, which is 2 weeks from this last Wednesday. My thought is, so we're supposed to provide an annual report as a committee. And I think we can provide we should be targeting to provide an annual report at that April 16th meeting. And the components I see of that annual report are what we talked about last week, which would be our recommended possible additions to reserve accounts. But I don't think we actually saw that as doable to be additions. But if we're going to fund ambulances more, and we're going to fund fire trucks more, and we're going to fund public works more, can we take money out of the Stone Pier Reserve? Is that discussion. So anyway, part of the report would be what we think we know about reserves. And then I don't think though we possibly could have a pretty darn close, almost 100% draft of our community presentation. I wondered, does it make sense to provide a community presentation that's almost complete on April 16th, as opposed to just an outline of what we're going to speak to in that presentation as part of our report to the selectmen?
Do you mean just provide them something to look at? The slides like I sent yesterday, or not do it live, right?
No. I'm saying they would like to, before their meeting, have a written report.
Yeah.
They'd like to have it the Friday before, so that would be a week from today. We'd give them a written document that says, this is what we've accomplished to date. And I think it can be relatively brief. They know what we've done on the asset list, and out of that came these recommendations to consider for additions to the reserve accounts. We have prepared, we're working on, or we completed a community presentation. I'm okay including the whole presentation, but if we provide that, a packet of slides, four slides to a page, then that'll be in their packet for the board meeting, and the whole community will see it. And that's my question, in that there's dialogue that goes with that. Does it make sense to do that?
Okay, so this would be a draft of the public presentation.
Yeah.
Okay. And
I'm just talking out loud. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm opening up for you guys to,
yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, I'm just trying to capture it so we have it rather than go back through the trends. At that time, we're assuming that they won't have the information. The auditors are the one that provide the information for the undesignated funds. Is that right?
Yes.
yes. Yeah.
Okay. And okay. And they will have it by then, or no, not by,
No, they said they were
Wait.
hoping to have a draft by the end of April.
okay.
So I think we speak to our concern about where the budget is now versus, what happens if you can't use the 250,000. And I think the only way you can balance tax increases at that point to whatever they believe is a reasonable level is to trim the reserve accounts.
That's pretty much it. I'm a little confused about a couple of things from what the town has done and not done. Have they actually made a decision to buy a fire truck? For
No.
instance?
No,
And because that's sort of the focus of a lot of what we're talking about in terms of the capital planning and how do you work your way around the short-term need for a new fire truck?
well, in our document that said here's where we think the direction we need to be moving is more funding in the reserve accounts for an ambulance, more
Right.
funding for the fire department in general, and a lot of that's the third and fourth fire truck that would be bought in 2038 and 2043.
Mm-hmm.
Try to save for those, and we said you're probably going to have to bond the next two.
Right.
The tank truck that was needed 2 years ago, and the next vehicle that's needed in 5 to 7 years or whatever.
Okay, so probably in this presentation, maybe one of the things that we should include and make a point about is that where things currently stand, you're going to be up 3% on your taxes. And that's including the 250,000. If you don't get that, you're going to be up around 10%.
Right.
And, I think that's, from the perspective of being a finance committee, that's a point that has to be made loud and clear.
Totally agree with that.
So I
Yep.
guess, I guess I see some of this as, I'm thinking out loud too, so forgive me. I had started to write, for instance, a little piece on policy, where do we borrow and where do we save? And, and what would be the sort of the boundaries of that decision. And I think that's some of the stuff that we need to be presenting to them as well, perhaps. But whether I can rewrite this in a cogent form or not in time for next Friday, I'm not sure. Without us having a chance to talk about it and think about it some more.
Yeah, and I'm, so backing up a little bit, we're supposed to, by the deliverables, make an annual report. We don't have to do that by April 16th. We can provide important pieces of input. It doesn't have to be our annual report. And then we're working on the community presentation.
Mhm.
And that could just be an outline of, we think our role is to give the community an understanding of why we need to save in reserve accounts, and certain reserve accounts need more savings.
Right.
We've got big projects coming that are going to have to be bonded. What's that list of projects? What's the list of existing grants? Saving versus bonding.
as I've worked on this, I mean, that's what I'm making the assumption that when we give the community presentation, all these decisions will have been made because Vika has to present for signature by then. Somewhere I have that.
Well,
So,
the decision as to what they're going to put in the warrant,
right.
they'll have to have made, and included in the warrant will be how much money is going to be spent on, or they're proposing be spent for each and every aspect of both the school and the town budget.
So, but they see if I'm right, it's the same date. Um, and
I think if you got, I think this whole thing got a little bit messed up and you were supposed to be separate. And, I think Bob's vacation interfered with the dates. And so I think if you want to present, it sort of makes sense to me to present before the warrant is final. I don't know how you feel.
yeah, I just want to figure out what it is. Because it depends, it'll depend on how we do. I have May 14th as, and then maybe this would be a final budget for a signature and our
So
presentation.
the final warrant is 5/21/25.
Oh,
So
Yeah.
we can still make changes, but it would probably have to be. So let's see, after approval, so the attorney's gonna have the warrant back by May 16th, according to Vika's notes here, but it doesn't mean we couldn't change the amount in the capital. I mean, that's still doable at that date.
so what do we have for, we have the draft, the public at April 16th. That's what we're working on here. We're taking notes for that. The other dates, we still would give a public presentation on the 14th, but will all of the financial decisions have been made by then? They may not have been cast in stone, but all of our recommendations and discussions will have happened before then.
Kind of, and I kind of feel like maybe we should have I mean, I kind of think the meeting on the capital meeting, which is 4/16, that's the one where we, I guess that would be helpful to have you guys there to talk with the board.
Yeah, and I think we're on the agenda for that, Carol. And you weren't here last week, I don't think. Maybe, Chip, you could bring up the one-page document where we said, at least directionally, we would be comfortable saying these reserve accounts, if possible, should be funded, should get additional funding.
We
Yeah.
had one that you sent to Ralph and one that you sent to
Right, but
Public
those were pieces of the document we looked at last week. So
where does it live?
Yeah, and I don't need to, so I think if you have recommendations that you sent, we can certainly, but that meeting on May 14th, April 16th, in a couple weeks, that's the one where capital, I would say we want to be pretty close, but we also, which we haven't done, we do need to look at the tax increase implications of the overall budget. It's kind of a balance between those two things in my world anyway. I don't know about Jay, is that the way you guys looked at it in the past?
Well, yep, yeah, mostly. It's, I mean, the capital, what you're setting aside for reserve funds are really, without the undesignated fund balance contribution, that's the only place you really have much in the way of adjusting anything.
Right.
And so,
Right.
you know, you know, I mean, that's just the facts of life. The question is really, it comes down to is how big a tax increase
Right.
are you willing to sign up for?
Right.
You know, and right now, using what John was saying about the budget as it currently exists, you're looking at about a 3% increment in the taxes. And that assumes you get the 250 out of the undesignated fund balance. You know, which we don't know that number yet.
Right. And I think that might be high because we had to, maybe if it wasn't last year, the year before, we had to pick a number. And I think, John, you were the one who corrected the error. But bottom line was, I think we thought we had more in there than we had. So honestly, I've been able to follow this. This auditor has been chronically late, and this is, anyway. But yeah, I think between those two things, that's sort of the bottom line. But we need to also go through and do the tax computation, at least with what we have, you know, some semi-final number, and see where it pans out, because our valuation might be a little different too.
Right, but the valuation is going to have to change dramatically to impact it much.
Yeah, yeah.
Did
I
you
mean-
say it might be a little bigger, Carol?
Usually it's been growing somewhat.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah,
helped buffer the tax increases.
Right. But-
And I guess I would say that the other place, which the other night was a bit of a debacle, but you know, the contributions to the nonprofits are, and it's not a huge, I mean, we're not going to cut them out, but that's discretionary.
Right.
There'd be a lot of screaming and hollering about that.
I know. So,
Well, the number one thing we need to do for April 16th is in advance of the meeting. So I'll draft an email with and attach our recommendations for changes to the reserve accounts at a minimum. And we can look at that next week or before next week, but at next week's meeting, we can say, yeah, that's fine. And we'll send it out on Friday, next Friday. So it'll be in the board packet. Have you been here the whole time, Carol? Did you hear all the conversation
I
about?
heard the solar thing. I was on the boat, so I had to drive home. So I wasn't on the whole time.
Yeah, so I think we're recommending an additional 160,000 or something like that. Don't hold me to that number, and they're mostly for fire department, ambulance, and public works, and maybe a little bit for the roads. I forget.
Yeah.
But the only place we're not saying we take the undesignated reserve funds from 795 to plus 165. Our question would be, are there other places that we can trim a little bit? And the obvious one would be the Stone Pier. And we talked about that a little bit, and you were going to try to reach out to DOT and see if you could get any handle on how much does a town have to have in reserve, to support grant applications, et cetera.
So I did send that, I emailed that question to Chris Mayo. He's notorious for kind of, he's tough to get an answer to. I think, that number was pulled out of the air. I forget how much we have in there now, but
Fix and change.
yeah. So
that's
I guess I'll do my best to get an answer to that. I think it might almost be better to talk to another town. administrator or someone who's had, the CDS doesn't require, it requires, if you get an earmark, you have to have some skin in the game, but there's no hard and fast rules. With DOT, it's different, but the other thing to bear in mind is it's more that we would be eligible. The more we have in the bank, I think the more we're eligible for some of the larger grants that they administer because it's a match. So that's the other incentive, is that the more we have, the more they can match. So, but I'm even more concerned about these pilings. I just want to be, we sort of made the assumption we're going to get 50% of those paid for, and I want to be sure that's the case. So anyway, I will follow up on that and get you an answer as soon as I can. I did email him, but I'm not frankly expecting a response.
Yeah, well, yeah, and we don't need the answer as much as it would just be helpful to support any discussion on April 16th, right? So.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I think somebody, maybe Jay or Jim mentioned at a previous meeting. I think one thing we should be doing is every capital cost should be the actual costs. And if we get grant funds, great, and we can have a way of showing that.
Right.
But I think in terms of estimating the cost, we need to use the total cost. And I will say that right now, the read on FEMA is not particularly rosy, and that's over $1 million. So we're, and some of that we do have to do. So, so the MEMA person said things did not look promising at the moment.
I mean, to give,
Yeah, so they know what we've been allocated, and we're in line, and we're further ahead than a lot of places, but the MEMA person, whose name I can't remember, was on a meeting last week and said, don't hold your breath right now. So I think we just might have to look at that as a worst case scenario, and what would we have to do for repairs? I just think that's part of, for the select board and you guys, I think we got to think about that. What if that money doesn't come?
which is
But I
what
do think it's reasonable to trim the stone pier as long as we have enough for a match, and there's probably a max that DOT can provide anyway.
According to this, just quick research on ChatGPT, it says DOT is 20%.
Well, the one we have now, it's 50%.
Oh, 50%. Okay.
The one we're in right now, but. Yep, I'm on it.
Thank you. So, I guess I'm backing up a little bit and thinking our major focus for April 16th needs to be the recommendations on potential additions to the reserve accounts. Maybe we don't need to say anything about the presentation at that point in time, although we could say, I think it would be helpful to say, here are the topics we intend to cover, so that we're not saying the same thing that the select board needs to say, whatever, to make the presentations more seamless and collaborative, let's say. So.
I also, we're kind of presenting to a moving target because there's many things that are happening simultaneously. So I don't mind, showing the slides so that they can at least see that and say, look, is this what you had in mind? I've been working on the presentation and assuming, because of the dates, that all of the financial decisions would have already been made. So this was more about some education, about some general concepts of, what this is going to do, and, saving versus bonding, that kind of stuff. But I don't.
So we have time to go through it if you want
to. If look at it now.
Sure.
Yeah, what I would think the select board would focus on is the fiscal year 26 budget, the estimated, increase, kind of where those increases are, what does it mean for taxes? I think you guys could focus primarily on, you know, exactly the analysis you have been doing and, you know, kind of your recommendations. And so I think, so we don't overlap too much. That's what I was thinking, but I'm open to,
No, I think we're on the same wavelength.
I mean, just going through quickly, looking at the slides without going in detail, the introduction and purpose, committee members, the duties of it, of the capital, what is a capital plan for some people? I mean, for myself, I'm thinking of people, what is a capital plan? I don't know. I didn't know. Maybe still don't know, but anyway, so these are kind of general things. Part of what, again, if we're talking about not the nuts, not actually financial decisions, what does it do? Then part of what I think we want to do is create something to establish that can succeed with further on down the road. There was a big discussion about that at the last meeting, and I think that trying to preserve something where people can work together. So to show that we have established this framework for all of the work, and that can be looked at by anybody, and that can go on down the road to the next committee. So that's what those two slides are about. Then getting into the existing assets. What is the asset? What did we do? We combined a bunch of semi-related documents into one document, which is the online asset worksheet. So that people can look at, such as it is, with all of its items in there, to look at. So there was, in general, how we came up with our recommendations. Again, education for people, town assets. What are these assets? Again, thinking of myself, putting myself in a position before I understood any of this, was there's a lot of stuff. And so that's the point of that. What are reserve accounts, savings? What are assets, hard and soft savings? Some of these are from our previous slide. This is one asset maintenance example John added to about the roads. And I think it's a good thing for people to see, because the roads are something that you say, well, never even thought about it, but it actually was our most expensive asset. It was over, $2.6 million. So that's kind of education, or bringing awareness to people about what do you want all the money for roads for. That's the next one. And then I've got a special slide for Herb's drainage. That comes in at the end. It does the anvil drop, but behind it is Herb's other thing about it's cheaper to maintain than to replace.
Attaboy, Chip.
There you go. All right, Herb. The assets, again, getting a little more specifics. These to show the process, and what we hope to have done is more than just come up with a dollar figure, but to create a process. And this was through Jay and John's discussions with, and again, nothing about Veek or anything. I mean, everybody's doing their best, they're doing their best, but there are conversations that happen outside of the formal communication channels. And in those, these things kind of came up: mowers, rollers, grabber, public safety, roof, furnace. These were things that weren't on those asset sheets that are used by the town. And this is a question about, again, a specific about the fire trucks, and you have to think of when are you going to replace them? Can you bond or can you save? And again, not that any of these are coming up with precise numbers, because I was assuming that all the financial decisions had been made when this would be going, and it was more for publics before the public gets asked to vote on it, to show them what went into it, and hopefully we're dividing a system. This is a capital project priorities, and low estimates, high estimates, and it's really just a graphic to show that there's a lot of big stuff coming up. Again, an awareness for the public to see things. this is John's. This is talking what we had. This slide needs a little more work, but this is again some of those budget decisions. This is the chart of the inflation. The consumer price index that they gave me is the blue, and that's the compounded. So you can't just add up tax increases, you have to compound them, because when it goes up 10% next year, it's going up 10% on what it went up this year. So it went up 10% this year and next year, it actually went up. So anyway, up at the end is 31% that the inflation went up, CPI, and then our tax rate actually based on the charts that we were given went up 23.7, 8% less. So that's maybe a way to show that the town has been conservative. This is the list of grants I think we got from Carol. All kinds of information in there, but a couple of the key ones are the amount of the award. And the purpose of that slide is to show that this work is being done also. There are grants, because I think there's a lot of people who have no idea that happened. This is the redid the bond debt expiring, and the big ones, the Cumberland for School. And while I've got you all here, I say Cumberland for School. And this is Cumberland. This is like the buyout from getting out of jail kind of card. What should I call these? Well, any suggestions?
Yeah, we actually have some terminology. I'll send it to you, and I think it, one was,
MSAD or something like that.
yeah, MSAD 51, and then the other one could be the town of Cumberland for now, anyway. I
Yeah.
think that's fine.
Okay. And town of Cumberland. Okay. So again, this was to show that there is in 2028, there's a big drop off. So if we got, we could say in this, you can't see that, but this right now you're tracking about 600,000 in debt, and it's going to be less. So this is to show some encouraging news that there may be more capacity in the near future, but it shows it graphically. Broadband isn't a clean number because there's going to be some number refunded, but again, it wasn't to. It was more to say these are the big bonds that are tracking, and as Jay has pointed out, we should get refunded for that, but we're still on the hook for it right now. So it's got to be listed as, there's actually two of them, and I don't know what the difference is, but this was designed not for intricate discussion, but for, I think if anybody does during these want to have it, we can have it, later on to go if they want to go. Future capital needs, these go through, again, talking about capital. This here is interesting, and it was only because I think in the danger of, and even I saw in the solar array numbers, people talk about numbers which are 20 years in the future, and you look at them and you say, oh, it's $200,000. It's 20 years in the future, that, or some of these savings. So we did, and this was all done by ChatGPT, a test to see if it was cheaper if we need a fire truck in 2043. Cost estimate in 2024 was $335. So we used inflation and stuff to get that up. And this just shows that in future dollars, if you were looking on a graph, you could say, well, we're going to save $743,000. But you have to remind people that that's in 20 years. So that's not buying as much hamburger then as it is now, but it looks like a huge number. So this here is today's dollars in today's dollars. It gives if that's savings, 25 years or whatever this is, 25-year bond, it can turn into a huge number, but it still is valid today as in both these instances. It shows savings, that it's still better to save. Obviously, you can't, you have to have the cash.
What is the graph on the, I get the graph on the left, I think. The graph on the right is, what is that?
That has been the inflation rate taken out of the dollar. So you're saying that the 700, and I have to double check these, but the 700 in what it's what that's worth, $743
In today's money.
in today's money. And
Okay.
it's just because it's enticing. It's like the life insurance things, it's, oh, I'll have $200,000 when I die. Well, so that's it proves it out. But of course, to remind people that you have to balance the cash flow. Obviously, you can't buy a fire truck you can't save for a fire truck in 5 years. So, but it's a concept that supports what we were talking about earlier. And then this is, John has a couple of scenarios. What happens if you do inflation only growth? What happens if it's inflation plus one? And I think the point is that even 1%, it looks at 1%, what's that? It's nothing. Well, over 10 years, I mean, it adds quite a bit. So these are important numbers that I think it's good for people to understand, that a lot of these big numbers have big time periods in them, and they can become important in financial decisions.
Yeah, and we might tweak that 11 million and 19 million. My confidence around that isn't 100%.
All right, I just fixed it.
Good.
Okay, if you don't like what you see on the screen, let me know. I'll change it. But yeah, I want to check some numbers too. But this is kind of, so it is, and this is just a farewell, kind of a summary, and then that's it. So
Too
it's
many slides. We
pardon?
don't have enough time.
Oh, the cars? Well, I don't know. We can bring it in if you want. It's up to you. See, I thought John, there's a pull to switcheroo, because I was going to be out of town, and John and Jay were going to present this. Now John's going to be out of town, and me and Jay are going to present it. So anyway, but
I'm kind of frustrated that I didn't realize that they didn't check with you about those dates, but anyway. I mean, we could change it to a Thursday night or something. You're gone for an extended period of time, John?
Yeah, I'm gone from May 1st until May 20th. So
Okay, well, yeah, I guess we probably have to do it in that window.
Yeah.
Okay. And one of the things you guys talked about, and Jay said it a few times, is sort of our bonding capacity. And it might be good to sort of have some comparison of, like, say we bond this much money, even just in today's situation, here's how that would impact the tax rate now and going forward, and then, some other amount, so people can get a concept of the variability.
we
yeah,
could.
and that's what the one slide that showed the 11 million and then 19 million tried to show
That's what, yeah, okay.
Yeah, if you added 1% every year, additional 1% every year to the taxes over 10 years, you'd pick up $3 million that could be used for bonding. And
Oh, okay.
so,
Right, so I think sort of in that term, I can fully understand it, and maybe there's a way to graphically show that same concept, but I think that's kind of a key thing that I think the average person, myself included, doesn't have an intuitive feel for.
right.
Yeah.
That's good, Chip. You've done a lot of work in that. It's a lot different than it was a few days ago.
Well,
I'm really starting to worry about my job, though, seeing what ChatGPT does, because I might as well just stay home.
I just saw these robots that they're producing now. I mean, these are robots in your house. Another slide showing possible, with bonding. No, I mean, I enjoy some of it. It's just because it's fun I mean, I'll just show you a peek at this slide. The way it presents. Oh, it's not going to show there, is it? Oh, that's too bad. But it does. Anyway, it is.
I
it
guess
is-
I just have one question about this slide. So this is our tax rate that you're showing,
yes.
but the evaluation's also changing with that rate.
Well, this was what the assessor said. No, I mean, it's what they gave us as that's what your taxes went up. Because this, when I look at some of the previous documentation, you've got two moving targets. Tax rate can go up, but your assess, it's really how much of a check do I write every year?
So what that was, Carol, is the tax assessor gave us the dollars by year that
Okay,
had
yeah.
to be raised by real estate
yep.
tax.
So that is the real value, not relative to the assessed
Right.
valuation. Okay,
Right.
yeah. So we probably have been too conservative.
Yeah,
Well,
I was surprised at how low they were in the early years.
Well, I think there was a lot of, angst about making sure we knew where we didn't really know how much things were going to cost for a while. Plus we had the bond. I think the debt I think we all gagged taking on that debt and didn't really have a sense of what that meant. It wasn't as bad as we probably perceived it to be.
this is the rate this is the chart I used for that was given, the assessor gave us, and these numbers here over in the
Yeah.
right-hand column. That's what so all the numbers on the left don't mean anything. It's what you pay is on the right.
Yeah, so
Yeah, okay.
the number on the
And-
right, that commitment number is the number that we all, when we're talking about how much the taxes are gonna go up, need to take that number, figure that number, which is the total expenses planned for fiscal year 26, minus the revenues, and there's, I don't know, there's 40 or 50,000 that comes in from state funding or something.
Yeah,
In his calculation, and figure out what's going to be required to come from real estate taxes, and then maybe the tax base of 330 million get changed a little bit, but we all need to be doing that calculation. So,
And if I apologize, but if I could remember my business calculus from college, the difference between this area and here, you could calculate what that was, and that's what you actually save by keeping these rates.
that's the money the taxpayers kept in their pocket.
Right.
Looked to me like the first selectmen were geniuses, and everybody since then has been just asleep at the wheel.
They were. These guys down here were really good.
Did you notice on one of the slides, Chip had the highest priorities for exit? Not only did we highlight the good job on the roads and how much we need to put away, but it's one of our highest ongoing priorities. He had it number one on top of the next
Yeah.
list.
Because I think it's one of those things, people are like, road, whatever, road is a road, but it's like, no, it's a lot, it's expensive.
Okay, so item 5 on our agenda. Summarize priority open tasks. Do we have a meeting scheduled for next Friday? I don't even remember. But if we don't, I would recommend we have one scheduled for next Friday.
Yeah, we do have one for next Friday, and then I'm out the following 2 Fridays. I'm away.
Yeah. So
that 4/26, that's not happening, right? The community presentation?
correct, that's now May 14th, I think.
Yeah, yep, that's right.
Okay, so I will draft a communication to the selectmen that we will do a final review on next Friday, and then we'll get that out, and that'll be what we talk about in the selectmen's meeting on the 16th, primarily focused on possible adjustments to the reserve accounts. And there may be some other things we'll put in that document. Concern about tax increases in the undesignated fund reserve and the potential change that could have in taxes. And I'll review the notes because I think we talked about a couple other things to prepare for that meeting. We should also go through the presentation that Chip did and make corrections for that. You're going to be away from the 19th for a week or so. And then I'll be gone, but maybe there's one more Friday in there that we could do a final tweak before the
And
community presentation. I'm going to work on the debt bond capacity and try to simplify that so the what if process is straightforward and calculates the bonding numbers without manual intervention. We ought to talk about the solar array and next steps. And maybe we could do that for 5 minutes now. With the information Matt gave us, I had a lot more comfort that getting an updated proposal from Revision made sense. And in asking for that updated proposal, we might say we'd like to understand what their maintenance costs have been historically and talk about the operating and maintenance agreement and the cost of that. And there may be a couple other things we want to talk about before they give us an updated version.
yeah, I think we do. Yeah, we definitely need that to decide on. Is there a deadline on decision?
Well, that was the question I was going to ask Carol. Would the purchase of the solar array have to be, the money is there in the reserve accounts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it needs to be approved, but you can ask her, but I don't think it's in a reserve account, so I think it's been designated for that purchase, so it's already been approved by the voters, but we might have to, I could be wrong, we might have to approve the agreement. The other thing that Matt mentioned was the recs. So if you're asking Revision for,
Right.
you want to just know what the cost to manage the recs are. That was the question Julia had. So Herb, are you on?
Yeah.
So do we have to, make this a warrant article, or since it's already in a reserve account, is it just whenever we want to spend it?
Yeah, but you're correct that in order to enter into an agreement for the operations and maintenance, you'd probably have to pass that by the town.
Yeah.
So that
I think it would be smart anyway. So, but we are also, just so you know, we're gonna have a special town meeting. The planning board didn't quite have their stuff together, and so they have some things that are gonna be unfinished, not on this town meeting, so they're looking at a town meeting in the late summer sometime. So if we couldn't get it together for this, so I think you probably can. But if you couldn't make this town meeting, there'll be another one within 4 to 6 months.
Okay.
Okay.
I would think, I mean, I don't, based on what we've got in some of the holes in the schedules. Yeah, it doesn't seem likely. I do have, and I do have some reservations again, and part of it's because of that, and like just talking about present value of money, you look at the $203,000 down there, that if you look at what that actually means when you're making a decision with today's dollars and you're looking at future dollars, you got to be really careful. And that $86,000 that popped up out of nowhere, which seems to be the reason seems to be, I don't know, just got some bad stuff, I guess.
That's the
Yeah. I don't know. I mean,
the present
was
value.
yeah.
I mean, the savings, $203,000, depending on how you want to figure it out, it's not quite, but it's probably closer to $130,000. And so if you are based on present value, and if you're looking at what am I going to save? I'm going to save $130,000 over 15 or 20 years and take that amount of risk, then it's a risk assessment decision rather than just looking at numbers. And that's what worries me more about it is the in this there's 5 or 6 variables in this equation, and one of them is the cost of maintenance. That's a big one. The other is there a change in the way that you're going to get credits or solar credits or whatever? That whole thing is up in the air too. So if it's a decision that had some kind of a deadline on it, you had to do it by then or else. But it seems to be. So it feels like a decision to me where it's got 3 or 4 variables that need a lot more information, and they all multiply times each other. So
Yeah, and I think that's why we kicked it to the finance committee, because we because it seemed to me like fundamentally, as Matt said towards the end, it's like, financially it might be a good decision as long as you feel like that, you want to spend the money. And I think that's the question the finance committee can help answer is this, if we have $80,000 or $90,000, is this the best way to use it? And that is why we kicked it to the finance committee, because we sort of came down to that. And I think Simon, Matt's partner, who's not the boss, but he's not as experienced as Matt, his initial comments to us last year were sort of like, you can just sit on this for a while. There's no rush. You lose some of the benefit, but, it's not as financially beneficial if you wait. But I also think we have to look at town capacity, and this little bit about managing the recs, or anything we have to do becomes more to do. And that to me is a concern, which has nothing to do with sort of money.
Well, the other maintenance concern was the issue that happened while Revision was on the job. It was like 6 months or something like that went on before anybody even noticed. And if we're in charge of it, it might be even longer,
Anyway, I think it's not urgent. I think you have time to think about it. And I think, we're not losing money in my mind while we're thinking about it. It's okay.
Not a lot anyways,
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that's bothered me all along about this is the 80,000 in maintenance versus the 18,000 they're suggesting.
Right.
And if they got bad inverters from somebody, weren't they under some kind of a guarantee? They go back and get them replaced for no additional cost. I mean, I just don't understand how that worked.
Well,
Right.
we don't know what it actually cost them to replace the inverters, do we?
No.
No, we just need a lot better understanding, I think, of how that works.
Yep.
And I
Okay.
agree with some of the things that Chip said about we're going to have to be careful with this O&M contract if we were to go ahead, and and how they're going to manage the credits. There's a lot of stuff we need to still investigate for this.
Yeah, it'll pay to do a thorough job of it, I think. It's the right thing. And I appreciate you guys digging into it like you are.
So,
Okay. Other discussion items?
Well, I guess I just have a question, as you guys have sat through some of these budget meetings. Outside of the capital budget, are there any observations or thoughts on the operational budget? I mean, I have some, but I don't know what you guys are.
I didn't spend a lot of time on the individual line items on the operational budget. But having said that, if we're able to, for the last few years, take 200 or 250,000 out of the undesignated reserve, that would say that all the little stuff adds up to where our budget was conservative to the tune of a couple $100,000 over a period of time. So if we can't take 250 out of the reserve when we get the auditor's input, an option would be to go back and take a real hard look at all the little stuff that adds up to the total.
Yeah, and so I think that's exactly right. And like, for example, in Public Works this year, we're budgeting for 2 full-time staff. But if you look at the expenditure for this year in particular, we're way under, and that was why I was kind of insistent that we pay for the operational aspects of the floats going in and out of that budget. Because it was budgeted by the taxpayers in there initially. And so we, taking it out of selectmen's, contingency did not seem appropriate. But I will say health insurance has taken a big jump. And I did ask the school committee, they do single subscriber only, and then the employee can elect to add family members at their cost. On the town side, we cover families, if you have a family, so it's not an equitable situation for the employees. If somebody's single, they're getting about half as much. It's 25 to 30 for a family coverage, and it's 12 to 15 for individual coverage. So it's a pretty big differential. Whereas when I was on the school committee, we just decided across the board, everybody gets single subscriber. You can buy into family coverage if you want. So that's kind of something to think about, because it's 25 to 30 grand right now per person for family coverage per household, per employee. And I will send to you, I did ask Vika for a printout of the wages, benefits, and, salary rates, so that we know where we're at. Because when you look at that operational budget, you can't see the detail. So I'll send that to you guys.
So somehow this conversation got me back, you're talking about the percentage of the wages in the public works that had been spent in the part-time, full-time thing. It's always bugged me that it seems for a long time, when the TAs report on finances are done, that the books haven't been balanced for 2 or 3 months. And I'll admit, I'm totally ignorant in what it takes to balance the books, but it's like balancing your checking account to some degree, and to be 2 or 3 months behind, if that results in the select board not having up-to-date data, that's not acceptable.
It'd be great if the finance committee makes that, as part of their report, or, to us. I think you can say it in the joint meeting we have coming up, because I agree. And there are some peculiarities apparently with Trio that aren't, unique to our staffing, but I have to say I completely agree. And we now have a bookkeeper, so it's a mystery to me why they're not reconciled. And I think that's a real issue, and at least that was not, it used to be pretty up to date.
Well, we went through, historically, we always had problems with that until Marjorie Stratton came in there, who
Right.
was a municipal auditor as a occupation at one point in her career. And so she had no trouble reconciling it. It was up to date for her whole term. But every other town administrator has, and it is just not rocket science.
Well, and we had Marjorie coming on contract for a couple years after she left, balancing our books. And, I thought it was the bookkeeper we had at the time, but this guy is very sharp. I'm not sure where the problem lies, and I think it might be the town administrator not being on top of things. To be honest, I'm not sure, but it is, I would be delighted if you make that comment.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great to come from the finance committee.
Like, that's a priority that the town administration, whose costs have grown significantly, needs to have a priority of, keeping, the accounts up to date and reconciled, not some of the other things that happen in that department.
Yeah.
So like, skip a meeting and get the accounts reconciled.
I do have a question just from us, if you're done talking about that, sound like you were.
Yeah.
So from a spreadsheet standpoint, I've got a line here highlighted, and at the finance committee, we talk in terms of dollars. These have percentages, and to me, they're not really valuable because it depends on what the percentage of how big a number they're talking about.
Agreed.
And so I don't, where do these and these spreadsheets are really crazy. But as father to another crazy spreadsheet, I can't poke fun at I live in a glass house. But anyway, I would say that it would be nice to have a column in here which just says what's the difference between this and that.
We used to have them. I don't know why it's been formatted this way. So in prior budgets, we did have an actual dollar amount change.
Yeah.
And so frankly, I never really look at the percentage change. I look at the dollar amount, and you're right. If it's $5,000 going to 5,500, it's sort of, big deal, but it might look big. And I think people do get fooled by these. I'd take them off completely, frankly, because it's deceptive.
Yes, and there's a lot of, but that's one that seems like
That could be another thing you could suggest. I mean, I think it's nice if that's an observation you've made, I agree. I mean, I'm not saying suggest it because I agree, but in their past practice was to have the actual value of the difference in a column. I think then they also did the percentage, but to me, that's the more important number.
Yeah.
I mean, Herb, when you were on the board, didn't Marjorie show that?
Yeah, we did. And in most of the history, I think we showed it. I don't know when it got taken off, but we used to have a little bit more. I think we used to have budget and actual at least a year or two back as well.
Yeah.
So that you could tell how you could tell what your thinking was a little bit, like where you underspent and where you overspent a little better. But
okay, well, it just seemed like it's anyway. Oh, sure, I'd be happy.
I mean, I agree, and I think it does, particularly for people who haven't done this much. I think it does kind of, they get.
It's very misleading.
It's misleading, and they don't really perceive the difference. There's a good one. It went from 100 to 500, and it's a 400% increase.
Right. That's the kind of thing, because
and you end up talking about it for 20 minutes,
Right. Well, that's why it can be, and there's a lot of, I mean, half of the spreadsheet is wasted space.
Yeah.
I mean, it only needs to be half as long. Anyway,
All
but
right.
I think that's part of that is moving forward, is looking, you're talking about, and I talked about the presentation a little bit, moving from actual numbers that we're talking about going forward from that, then it might be looking more at the processes that we've seen during this, not so much right now, although I'm happy to mention the spreadsheet, but anyway.
And I think when you do an annual report that, a bulleted recommendation list of just at that level of detail that you're talking right now would be really helpful, and it would be documented in a place that, everybody could refer to.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of towns use, it looks to me like a particular form or spreadsheet when they go through the operational departmental budgets. They have it's a form, and they fill out what they want to add or increase, and they justify it, and it's kind of attached to the cell on the form, and it's really handy. And I think what we get is annotations in the spreadsheet, like, see, bonus pay to town employees who work over 24 hours. I mean, I think, I think we could document it better. I also think personally, I think we're gonna have 4 meetings on the operational budget when we should probably to be able to go with 1 or 2. I just don't know why we have to have so many meetings on that, because it is partly, to be honest, I will say this year, it's partly because it wasn't ready. So when we had our first meeting, the budget wasn't updated to reflect the proposed fiscal year 26 changes. So the first meeting was kind of a waste. It was partially updated, but not completely.
I agree 100%, 200%, Carol. And I've talked to Herb about developing a relational database because, as I listen to these budget meetings, it's a lot about you being told on the spot what's going on.
Yeah.
And so it's not decision. It's like I'm going to suggest for us going into these last few weeks before people go is I love meetings, but they're usually 50% a waste of time because people can work offline and create the same thing. And in a case like this, when all the stories are in somebody's head, you can't learn except when you're sitting there in a meeting, and that's not the best kind. People should be able to work when they can, and they should be able to go through that. And each one of those numbers has a story to it, and that's where a spreadsheet becomes not helpful. And Herb, I see Herb's. I don't know if he's going to make that database or not, but there may be software. We talked about it.
My rates are going to go way up if I start working.
Good. We'll put it in. We're going to have a reserve fund for Herb Main.
I'm
Anyway.
going to jump off, guys. Thank you for all
Okay.
your efforts. I'm going to try and make the dump quick.
Have fun here.
Okay.
Thanks,
See ya.
Herb.
So, but that's future stuff. That's future stuff. But that's what could help you guys a lot. And it also, not in terms of education and select board, but for the next select person, they can go in. That's why the base camp, and it's not a perfect thing, but that's why it's important to have that story.
Well, I think, we're just trying, you've already made a lot of headway, and the capital thing is the priority, but at some point, sort of the budget process my opinion is it should start earlier, not in January.
Yeah. Right.
There should be, the town administrator should not even present the budget till she's talked to every single department head and figured out, what the needs are. We should see that before we review, at
Sure.
least or contemporaneously with the budget. But
Right.
what's been going on is this back and forth, and things come in later, and it's like not cool. And it's a waste of my time.
Yeah.
Personally. So that's kind of, and I think we turn this budget process into this arduous process on the operational side, which should be a meeting or 2, and the capital gets kind of short shrift. And so I think we need to kind of flip the deck a bit. But
Okay.
All right. Any other subjects? We're
Oh.
meeting next week. You probably sent the minutes from last week, Chip, but if you did, I didn't read them.
You what?
So can we approve?
I'll bring one over. No, it's on base camp.
Next week's next meeting.
Okay, you can approve. We'll approve it at the next meeting.
Okay.
All right. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Okay. Thanks a lot,
thank
Carol.
you, guys. Thank you.
It's a big help, Carol, when you're here. It is.
Yes.
Thank you.